And welcome back. This is the Catholic Lady, and we're reading Great Lion of God by Taylor Caldwell. We just finished chapter 24, and a strange event happened while Saul was at his home in Tarsus. And there was a footnote noting that that particular phenomenon happened all over the world. It was recorded even on the Incan calendars. And so this was the moment. And if you know the Bible and you know about the Passion of Christ, you know what happened at the moment that he died. At 3:00 in the afternoon, the world turned dark. The curtain of the temple was torn in two, and the earth shook. And evidently, that happened not just in Jerusalem. It was universal. The entire world. It was as if God just stepped away from us for a little while, took away the sun. So now we'll continue as Saul is writing a letter to Jerusalem. Chapter 25, Part 1. Saul wrote to Jerusalem to his sister, Joseph of Arimathea, and to Rabban Gamaliel, asking them if they had observed a remarkable and uncommon phenomenon which had occurred on the eve of the Passover in Cilicia. He, Saul, considered it a local occurrence, not significant, but uninteresting. He sealed the letter and sent it to Jerusalem, not without some sheepishness. In the meantime, he had rationally explained the event over and over to himself, and particularly to Aristo, who merely cocked an eyebrow over one of his black and restless eyes and smiled. He made but one observation. My Saul, I believe it a most ominous event. If I believed in the gods, which thankfully I do not, I would say that Olympus had been convulsed to its very heart, and that Zeus had decided to destroy this world out of some divine wrath, but had been restrained at the last moment, probably because it came to him that if the world were destroyed, so would be thousands of lovely maidens. That is a thought not to be borne lightly. Saul did not care for this levity, nor did he speak of his own terror on that day. A black storm cloud, he suggested, had gathered over Tarsus for a space, and then had withdrawn. So black a storm cloud, said Aristo, that only the sun had gone, but the stars peeped out? I saw them myself. No, Saul, I am inclined to believe that the event was preternatural. And he laughed, seeing that he had vexed Saul. The spring, golden as dawn, melted into the green and abundant summer, and a luminous haze softened the mountains. Saul became more and more impatient, and as he was more and more convinced that he was awaiting a call and yet was not receiving it, again each day he resolved to return the next to Israel. Then early one morning his overseer came to him in great excitement to inform him that he had a noble visitor, a Roman, a captain of the Praetorian Guards. Titus Milo Platonius, exclaimed Saul, hurrying in from the gardens, his hands brown and damp with soil. He was delighted and amazed to see his handsome cousin awaiting him in the atrium. The men embraced affectionately. Milo removed his helmet and loosened his belt, and looked about him with pleasure. And all this for a man without wife or child? Not even I in Rome have such a villa. His strong brown face was heavily furrowed with weather, and his cropped brown hair revealed streaks of gray. But his old spare elegance was with him still, and his manner of military grace, and, as always, he was stately. Saul showed him at once one Saul showed him to one of the guest chambers and clapped for servants to attend the noble soldier and refresh him. Saul had not known such pleasure for a long time, so long a time he could not remember. He realized how lonely he had been in his father's house for nearly a year, and now the house was warm with love and friendship again, and he eagerly awaited Milo's joining him in the summer portico, where beautiful flowers bloomed tall in Chinese vases and pots, and a fountain cooled the hot, bright air. He clapped for wine and light refreshments, and threw his kitchen into wild dismay, as light refreshments were usually not encouraged in this house. But by the time Milo came out into the portico, the cooks had contrived some delicacies, and had unearthed some good wine from the cellar, and had brought in a salver of young green onions and radishes, and some hot artichokes swimming in oil, with a touch of rosemary. From some mysterious hiding place, not so mysterious to Saul, who lightly frowned, they had discovered some marvelous cheeses. They pamper their stomachs, these servants, he thought, but was reluctantly pleased. Milo had removed his leather armor and wristlets and cloak and military garb, and had dressed himself in a short yellow tunic, bordered in red Grecian keys, and his tanned legs were still the legs of a sturdy youth, and his feet arched in their fine sandals. He even wore an armlet of wide plain gold. "I suppose, dear cousin," he said to Saul, "that you wonder at my appearance here in Tarsus." Saul was astonished. He considered. "No," he confessed, "I did not think of that at all, and that is very peculiar. I was only glad to see you." Milo smiled, showing almost all his white teeth, and he studied Saul shrewdly. He sampled the refreshments, sipped the wine, and revealed his pleasure. Even his big protruding ears were brown, and his hands were bronzed. He looked at Saul with his father's kind eyes, and appeared to think and turn his thoughts about. "I am returning to Rome from Jerusalem," he said, as if he were examining each word. "My parents are old. My father also wishes to return to Rome, where he hopes to be elected a tribune. He is old now, so is my mother. I had not seen them for 4 years, nor had I seen my sisters and their children for that time, and I have some leave. Do not concern yourself about my men. They are ensconced in an inn in Tarsus, and they are young lads who have never been in this city before, and are, without doubt, now investigating the feminine possibilities here." His smiling face became suddenly very serious, and he ate some bread and some cheese as if lost in his own thoughts. Seeing this, a vague uneasiness came to Saul, but Milo said, "My ship stopped in Tarsus, and I decided to visit you." "Otherwise you would not have done so?" said Saul, who was surprised by his own disappointment, for he thought affection had brought Milo here. "You are wrong," said Milo, and gave his cousin his quick, if somewhat saturnine smile. "I knew that ship because I wished to visit you. I chose that ship because I wished to visit you." "Ah," said Saul. And with his old impulsiveness he stretched out his hand to his cousin, and they grasped each other's fingers in a brief, firm clasp. Then Saul said, "You have something grave to tell me. In the name of God, blessed be his name, tell me at once if it is bad news." "It is not bad news," said Milo. "It is most portentous news." "Of my family?" "In a manner of speaking. But it concerns—" And Milo paused, and did not look directly at Saul now, but out upon the shimmering gardens. It was as if he feared, as customary, any extravagant language, for was he not a Roman? Yet what but extravagant words could convey what he must convey? "It concerns," Milo continued, his brown cheekbones coloring as if with embarrassment, "the whole world." Instantly Saul's thoughts flew to the phenomenon of the eve of the Passover, and the letter he had recently written. But he did not speak. He only looked at Milo with the bright blue metal of his eyes, and waited, and a sensation of extreme tenseness came to him. "I am Jew as well as Roman," said Milo. and expertly fished out an artichoke with his fingers, and slowly savored and chewed and swallowed it. He contemplatively then licked his fingers, ignored the luxury of the warm water in a silver bowl, floating with rose leaves, and wiped his hands on a napkin. The fastidiousness of the savoring was familiar to Saul, the Jew, but the roughness of the Roman manners would have, under other circumstances, annoyed him. Then Milo, as if wishing to escape Saul's penetrating eyes, bent over the cheese salver and made a delicate choice in a long deliberation. After he had removed his selection to his silver plate and buttered some bread, he went on, lifting his eyes for only an instant to Saul's, and Saul was freshly amazed at the stern yet thoughtful light in them, for never had he seen it before. "I sacrifice to Mars, my patron, in his temple," said Milo. "I give the deepest devotion to Jupiter, though I cannot, in all truth, consider Julius Caesar and Gaius Octavius Caesar divinities. Excuse me. But I honor them also in their temples, though I laugh in my heart. Do I believe in the gods of Greece and Rome, and several of the Egyptian gods? I do not know. They are full of splendor and beauty, and the understandable by men. They partake in our nature, and they are subtle as well as gross. On the other hand, I am my mother's son, and so I have been circumcised and was presented in the temple. I believe a slight sum passed from my father to the priest, and I was bar mitzvahed, though the other boys taught me as a bloodthirsty Roman, and as a child, and a lad I learned the 5 books of Moses, and all the prophets, and Jewish customs, and the things forbidden, the Torah, the Psalms, and all that you have studied, Saul. In those days I was called Titus Milo ben Olus." He smiled again, and Saul thought the smile wry. "Now when I go to the temple, excuse me, or the synagogue, I stand in the court of the Gentiles. But what I bear within the temple stirs my blood with ancient cries and movements. And when I stand before the altar of Mars, I am also so stirred. And I believe in my patron with absolute faith, just as I believe in God of Abraham and Jacob." Saul said, "The Greeks believe that all religions contain a measure of the truth, but not all the whole truth, Milo." Excuse me. Milo caught the reserve in his cousin's vibrant voice, and he said quickly, "But you do not?" Saul hesitated. "I would be lying if I said I believe the Greeks. I believe that there is but one truth, blessed be his name, and I await his Messiah." Again he hesitated. "Forgive me if I have offended you, but I cannot lie." "I am at times in a very contradictory situation," said Milo. "Sometimes it is an untenable state. At other times it is as if I see a broad landscape not narrowed to one little vista, but embracing the world. No matter, it is my nature to be direct, and I fear I am not being so now, for I have been witness to astounding events." Saul's thoughts again flew to the eve of the Passover, and he said nothing. "I was fortunate," said Milo, "to arrive this time in Jerusalem to celebrate the Passover with my parents. You know that 2 of my sisters are married to Jews. They gather in my father's house for the holy days. Does it seem amazing to you that my old Roman father wears a skull cap on those occasions and exhorts his grandchildren on the history and the glories of Israel and the covenant God made with her?" "I have heard it," said Saul, and could not help smiling. "And Hannah, in gratitude and love, has the Roman layers and penance in her house." Excuse me. "My father, like myself, honors all the gods, though he honors the Jewish God more. What Rome will make of this when he returns, I do not know, but Romans are tolerant of all religions, so long as those religions do not teach rebellion against Rome. They even erect temples to strange gods and honor them, as you know. I am very proud of both my people." "You have something to tell me," said Saul. Yes. Milo refilled his goblet and looked at the winy contents and swished it around and sniffed at the bouquet. Saul saw that he was biting for time, and his uneasiness sharpened. You have heard of the Galilean, Yeshua of Nazareth, or Jesus, as we Romans have interpreted his name? A cold stiffness made Saul sit upright. He nodded without speech, but his face tightened. Your sister, my cousin Sephora, has written you concerning him, this Jesus, and I bring you her letter to you, and letters from Joseph of Arimathea and my own parents. Now is Milo, who hesitated, then lifted his brown gaze and looked at Saul steadily. Was Tarsus darkened also on the eve of the Passover? A tremendous excitement seized Saul, and he cried, Yes, yes! I have written to my friends of this and my sister. Did it darken Israel? Impossible! It was but a storm cloud over Tarsus. A very strange cloud, said Milo in a musing voice. I have received letters from my compatriots in Rome, my fellow soldiers, that the cloud covered Rome also for a considerable time, and at the hour it covered Cilicia and Israel. And I have heard Egypt and Asia Minor and the Isles of Greece. A very strange cloud. Saul's nostrils drew in with this sharply drawn breath. It can be explained, he said. Surely the astronomers are now explaining it. But to no one's satisfaction, not even their own. There is prattling of comets, and their sudden disintegration which hid the sun. This argument fails before scientific examination, as the scientists understand themselves. The darkness did not last long enough, and when it lifted suddenly, and all was as it was before, except for one thing. Yes, cried Saul, leaning toward him. But Milo said, You have not heard from Sephora since some time before the Passover, no? I must tell you why. Her son Amos was about to be bar mitzvahed, and as he was the favorite of all the family, a boy of great wisdom and learning and tenderness and virtue and strength and beautiful, the family intended to make of it a great celebration. This was some short weeks before Passover, but on the 3 days before the Passover, the boy fell gravely ill of some mysterious disease, and he was given up for dying by his physicians. Saul uttered an exclamation of grief and great anxiety. But the boy recovered? No, said Milo, and again he looked at the gardens. He died. Oh God, cried Saul, overcome with anguish. Oh, it is not possible. I knew the boy. He had the face of an angel. He resembled my father. He covered his face with his hands and groaned. You swore to me that you did not bring me evil news, but now you have broken my heart. Let it be healed, said Milo gently, and Saul, blank with astonishment, dropped his hands. His face ran with tears. The boy died at dawn, said Milo, and he looked straightly at Saul's pallid face. The 3 physicians were there. One, the renowned Egyptian, whom the Greeks call Horus, though that is not his name. And in 2 hours the child was of an icy coldness. They had closed his eyes and his white lips. The house had been gaily decorated for the bar mitzvah. The decorations were taken down, and the brothers and the friends, parents, and the grandfather of Amos, and the uncles and grandsons and nephews sat down in ashes and tore their clothing. Sephora was taken to her bed, overcome. The house was filled with mourning. Burial clothes and oils and spices were prepared. A tomb was chosen. The dead boy lay on the floor hourly, becoming more livid and ghastly, so that it was an agony to look upon him. The sunset was approaching when he must be entombed. Saul unclosed his eyes quickly as he saw what Milo had seen, and his heart began a slow, sick drumming. It seems, said Milo, as if at an immense distance, that there was a servant in the house who had looked upon Yeshua of Nazareth and had fallen at his feet. He was an old and devoted servant. He had loved the boy Amos. So knowing that Yeshua was newly arrived again in Jerusalem, doubtless to celebrate the Passover in Jerusalem according to the law, he ran out seeking him, and he found him. Saul's face so changed that Milo could hardly recognize it. It had become fierce. This disturbed Milo, but he went on. While the women washed the dead child, the Nazarene came to the door of the house with several of his miserable disciples, the old servant leading the way. The Nazarene entered the beautiful house of your grandfathers and looked sadly at the mourners. He did not speak to them. He approached the dead boy who was now being wrapped in his grave clothes. He contemplated him. It seemed that Yeshua, or Jesus, as we Romans call him, was about to weep, not because the boy was dead. He profaned my grandfather's house, whispered Saul in furious soft horror. Listen to me, cried Milo, losing his military composure for the first time. You have not been listening to me, Saul ben Hillel. You have been listening only to your own thoughts, you obdurate man. But were you not always so, alas? Listen to me. Jesus stretched forth his hand, and he said, I say to you, arise, Amos ben Ezekiel. And the boy stirred in his grave clothes, and he opened cloudy eyes, and he looked about him strangely, and raised his head. And the mourners sprang to their feet with terrible loud cries, and then flung themselves about to feel his warming flesh, and to see the color returning to his white cheeks and lips. None but the adoring servant saw the Nazarene leave, this Jesus, and none thought of giving him so much as a goblet of wine, or offering him a shekel. Saul jumped to his feet and moved rapidly to a column of the portico, and he stretched out his hand against it to support himself, and his back was to his cousin. Do you not understand? Said Milo, rising also, but standing by his chair. He who was dead was given life. He who was dead restored in a twinkling to health and to his family's arms. He, ready for the grave, was bar mitzvahed before Passover. Your nephew lives, Saul of Tarshish. Your nephew lives.